From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, Chris. How good was it being able to spend some time with the Step mates and, of course, Pauline Hanson, that incredible cartoon out each and every Friday. Thank you very much for watching. Yes, the Man Cave is in Melbourne tonight. You'll find out why tomorrow, but there's plenty to talk about right now, including, as the Pauline Hanson cartoon that you just saw was about, there is a great demand for Australians to have some relief when it comes to petrol. And right now, petrol around the country is very expensive. You don't need me to tell you that. Here in Melbourne, it's $2.05 a litre. It's $1.97 in Sydney. It's $2.11 in Brisbane, and it's $2 in Canberra. But as you know, the Prime Minister and his Treasurer, future Prime Minister Jim Chalmers, just ask him, have made it very clear that they will not be cutting petrol taxes anytime soon. Now, I bang on about it every night because I think it will make a real difference to people. Think of the amount of money that it costs to fill a car that you almost have to fill up again 10 days later and you have no idea where all the Ks went, let alone the cost of anyone who wants to use their car to have the basis for their business. A couple of days ago, I was talking to a mate of mine who's doing Uber right now as a way of trying to find some extra cash on the side. He was explaining about how expensive it is right now to fill your car, but also remember that when it comes to Uber, Google, the company behind it, Uber, but other services, they take 27%. 27%, so you have access to their service. So people who are trying to find a way to make ends meet by doing a few extra hours, driving other people around, well, of course, they have an extra cost, that be petrol. Just one of the many reasons why I talk about it as frequently as I do. But of course, this government, no plan whatsoever when it comes to petrol. No plan to cut excise. No plan to cut it because, I don't know, are they afraid that they're going to have to give in to the demands of that guy on TV? It's not about that. It's the fact that they've got $24 billion surplus and they could spend $3 billion of that tomorrow to cut the price by 25 cents. Now, you know that, I know that. But while Australia is living through its cost of living crisis, while something as simple as that could be done by this government, we get to see what their priorities are. And apparently more important than dealing with cost of living, more important than cutting petrol tax is your television. The federal government have announced that they are going to make rules, even laws, about what app goes where on your new smart TV. Now, for a huge number of people, this isn't going to be a problem, but for anyone who's buying new TVs, in the same way that radios used to have AM and then went to FM and had DAB put inside them, and then we started to get things like Apple Play. The reality is every TV you buy from now on will have things like this, and you should be able to decide what TV station goes where, which one is first, which one is last. Oh, no. The priorities that have now been put in place by this government is that free-to-air channels have to go first because, you know, you might accidentally end up watching Sky News. But this is totally unnecessary, but it's an example of fiddling while Rome burns. Now, you would expect me to say this because, of course, I work for pay television, subscription television, but it's not about that. I'd have exactly the same view no matter where I worked because, put simply, you're in charge of your television. But what sort of nonsense is it where the federal government that won't do what it has the power to do, like cut your petrol taxes, is wasting its time inventing powers over what has priority on your television? These people are desperate to find ways to go after their political opponents, to go after members of the media that they don't like. But it doesn't matter whether we're the first, the last, or not even an app on your television. You will continue to search out Sky News. I appreciate that. If you're watching us on Sky News Regional right now, which is free to air in big chunks of the country, you search us out. You search us out and maybe even have the homepage of skynews.com.au. You search us out when it comes to YouTube, and millions of people do. So they can play whatever silly games they want. None of it will cut off your access to what we do here every night and the station every day. And one of the reasons why you search us out is for obvious reasons. We focus on the real issues. Cost of living is the real issue in Australia. Now, as you will have noticed, there was inflation numbers that came out today, and there has been a reduction in the amount of increases. That's all we're talking about here, by the way. Nothing got cheaper. Just as it was going up, it wasn't going up by as much as it was going up by last month. But of course, the media, desperate to find a positive story to bail out the government that's currently losing in the polls, well, this was the greatest thing since sliced bread, which is still more expensive than it was last year.
A pre-Christmas Reserve Bank interest rate hike is now looking unlikely, with monthly inflation data showing a large decline today.
New inflation data shows the cost of living is actually falling.
Inflation fell in October to 4.9% from 5.6% in September, and it was a sharper drop than expected.
Well, the new inflation data is welcome relief for households.
A Christmas rate hike just became less likely. The annual rate of inflation has dropped from 5.6% to 4.9%.
But as you know, one of the things that we do here each and every night is I try to show you the data, give you the receipts behind the opinion. And guess what? There is plenty inside this data that is nowhere near the picture that has been painted in the past 24 hours. Now, again, I am not going to pretend that 4.9 is not lower than mid-fives. But remember, the Reserve Bank is doing what it is currently doing to get it down to between 2 and 3%. Now, if 2% or 2.5% would be where they want to land, then basically we're still double where the Reserve Bank ultimately wants it to be. Now, hopefully, the amount of interest rate rises that have happened to this point will slow things down, and therefore there'll be no need to increase. But there's every chance that they could do it in early December, or if they wait, they'll have to do it in February because of the amount of money that we're all potentially going to end up spending this Christmas. But have a look at that number, 4.9. Put it in the head right now. Now, let me show you all of the things that have gone up by more than 4.9% in the past 12 months. We're comparing, of course, October to October. The data comes out at the end of the following month. Gas and other household fuels, 13%. That's not 4.9. Tobacco is at 10.4%. That's not 4.9. More importantly, electricity is up by double everything else currently in inflation, which is, of course, double what the Reserve Bank is currently trying to achieve with all of these interest rate hikes. Automotive fuel, again, they won't cut the tax. It's 8.6% compared to that 4.9. Insurance, bread, dairy, health, and other food products, all way above the number that they celebrated today of 4.9%. Now, again, I'm not pretending that the headline is not something worth paying attention to. But if the government wants to pretend that they were involved in all of this, we'll pull the other one that plays Jingle Bells, even though tomorrow's December. But you get my point. The government has sat back and done nothing as the numbers have gone up, come down, gone back up, and now start to come down. But they're not going down to where we were. They're just coming off where they were. So there's still plenty of increases here, including plenty of increases in things that you can't avoid, like electricity. The government tries to turn around and say, well, we've saved you from 0.5% of all potential inflation. Well, the reality is at 5%, it is double where the Reserve Bank needs it to be. On things like electricity and things that you can't do without in terms of basic foods, again, way higher than the overall average. So if there is light at the end of the tunnel, it is still too long away. And then, of course, when it comes to housing, I had a bunch of people come up to me today who were shocked at what we showed you last night. That when you put together the elbow dozen of interest rate rises, on top of the one that happened just before the last federal election, the reality is that somebody on a $500,000 loan is now paying $13,500 more than they were this time last year. $750,000, $21,000, $29,000 on $1 million. So on top of that right now, while the media celebrates because the number looks a little bit lower than the previous one, and that's good news for the government, and we want good news for the government because the polling currently isn't good news, and they haven't had good news since the Voice was 60-40 at the start of the year. Well, electricity is still up by double the headline number, let alone things like automotive fuel, bread, food, health, and the rest of it. And if anyone wants to pretend that the cost of living crisis is over because there's a number that's ever so slightly lower than the one that we were talking about on the show last night, would somebody like to tell the people who represent the people who work in our shops? The Shoppers Union today have again doubled down on where the Woolies CEO was a couple of days ago, which is cost of living is creating such tension in the aisles that people are blowing up verbally, and there is fear of physical intimidation as people lose their brain about how much everything continues to cost. Watch this space. But as I said, the media now again know that they need to save this government. They need to save this government from themselves, and they need to turn all circumstances into wins for the government. A perfect example of that was the reporting in and around the Australian dollar. Now, as I've spoken before, the worth of the Australian dollar is, of course, something most of us really only pay attention to if we're planning on going overseas. But the reality is that a low Australian dollar is terrible for things that get imported into the country because it costs us more money to import those things into the country. Now, yes, a lower Australian dollar does mean that when it comes to exports, there's a little bit more margin there. But Australians, in terms of what we purchase, what we buy, what we do with our lives, we import more than we export. Think about things like cars, clothes, televisions, including the televisions now the government is planning and have made their decision that they're going to go to control. Well, again, the media trying to celebrate any bit of data that says everything is awesome, like the Lego movie, celebrated that overnight the Australian dollar went to a 3-month high. So I thought, geez, we've talked about this before. Bloody hell, what's the number? And the Sydney Morning Herald, why is the Australian dollar surging? Well, do you want to know what the reality is? It is still way lower than it was before the current mob came to power. Even after a massive surge of like 2 cents, the Australian dollar is still only worth 66 US cents compared to where it was before Chalmers and Albo at 75 US cents. Now go the Aussie dollar, I hope you get back to 75, 76, 80 and parity. But anyone pretending that there's been a surge in the Australian dollar when they have the data to look back, yet they fall for it each and every damn time. The reality, of course, of that Australian dollar, it affects what we import, and we import so much. Now, as always, it's a privilege to be here in the Tower of Talk in Melbourne. My wonderful colleague, Peter Credlin. If you didn't see her show tonight, I want you to go and find her editorial about Clueless Claire O'Neill. Pitch perfect, knocked it out of the park. Because Clueless Claire O'Neill is now not just clueless, not just hopeless at what she has done when it comes to the people who were let out of detention, and now it seems most likely there was no need to let as many out of detention as they did because the High Court turned around and gave them a little bit of wiggle room. But now, of course, Claire O'Neill talking tough. We've got brand new legislation that even previously she said they weren't able to introduce. This is after the legislation that this time last week, or this time a couple of weeks ago, Peter Dutton turned around and saved the government from. Now, she again thinks that the Jedi mind trick, you didn't see the news yesterday, or you're stupid and you'll just forget, you'll be lost in the amazement of her abilities. Well, of course, the madness here is that the legislation that previously she said there were some issues with that now must be passed before everyone gets to go home this weekend, she's now trying to turn around and pretend, and again, I point out what Peter had to say, because she's just lying now. Now, as we showed you a couple of days ago, she is lying to pretend that when all else fails, she's following the same playbook as Albo, Chalmers and everyone else, which is blame Dutton, pretend it was Dutton's fault. She told lies in the Parliament today, suggesting, of course, that it was Peter Dutton who was trying to find a way to keep the bloke who was behind the High Court challenge in the country. Again, I keep referring to what Peter said because her detail is crisp and picture perfect on this. Remember, it was her doing the hard work on Operation Sovereign Borders when Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister, along with Scott Morrison, along with Peter Dutton, and along with, of course, the great late Senator Jim Molan. Now, she knows the details here, and she made it very clear that this bloke wasn't being kept in the country because Dutton was finding some way to do it. Instead, it was a legal manoeuvre because there were so many cases that needed to be gone through. But even worse than that, Claire O'Neill always has this little trick where the thing she wants to appear on the 6 p.m. news, when she stands there like every other politician, she doesn't look at her notes, she looks up to the camera, hoping that that will be the thing that the media takes on. And have a look at this for the Blame Dutton political strategy of the clueless Claire O'Neill when she actually tried to say this in Parliament today. It's a disgrace and no one's buying it.
We have seen 3 weeks of the most shameless politics I have virtually ever seen played in this Parliament. And that included, Speaker, included the opposition's unbelievable action earlier this week, where we brought a proposal to this Parliament, the Minister for Immigration brought a proposal to this Parliament to strengthen the laws that we passed to criminalise pedophiles loitering near schools. A pretty uncontroversial proposal. But what did they do? They came in and they voted against it. And there was only one reason for that, because they put politics above the safety of the Australian community.
You see, Claire O'Neill thinks that you are collectively stupid enough to believe what she is saying. She thinks that if you speak loudly enough and scream loudly enough, then eventually that will be the only thing that you can hear. But the incompetence of this minister has been on show every single day. It's been reported on by every single media organisation, even the ones that are trying to currently bail the government out. She is clearly hopeless at her job. Because remember, between her and the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, they probably didn't have to let out all of the people that were being held until the High Court produced its reasons. Once it produced its reasons, as I say, there was wiggle room that many of these people would have been able to stay in while the government tried to find a legislative solution. And remember, even when these people came out, they came out to hotels that had no security whatsoever. They had scenarios where people weren't wearing ankle bracelets. People were able to refuse the ankle bracelets. Yet they're the ones pretending that they're the ones that are talking tough. The same people who in their heart, you know, the Prime Minister himself, as late as 2015, within these 10 years, said that he didn't have the heart in him to turn around boats, that it would be the inhumane thing to do. He voted that way at Labor Party conferences. But once he worked out that he had to change his mind when it comes to becoming the Prime Minister, he had to pretend that he was going to be tough on the borders. Now, the reality is they have turned around a few boats, but guess what? We've learnt in the past week. There was a boat that turned up here in Australia. Now, how do they miss those? I don't know. We also learned that there are people that are still trying to pay people smugglers $10,000, including some people who got caught today, $10,000, to be able to hop a boat to come here to Australia. So it's still a threat. So does anyone believe on God's green earth, and I say that as you know as an atheist, but it's a good saying, that Claire O'Neill is more invested in Australia's national security than Peter Dutton? If you do, well, you can pull the other leg, because that plays Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Meantime, for her part, the Deputy Liberal leader has gone right after this clueless, pointless minister.
Well, I'm just tired of Claire O'Neill every single day pointing the finger at the opposition, who have led the response to this debacle under her watch from the beginning. There's been over 100 detainees, some of them hardened criminals, released on her watch. And there's been botched legislation, which we've had to fix up at least once, and no doubt we will again.
And as you know, the former head of the public service part of the Home Affairs Department, the people who have done the hard work and, yes, had the hard hearts at times and the hard heads, of course, well, they sacked the one that was associated with all of the policies that they didn't like. And now they have put in a brand new boss of Home Affairs, a lady called Stephanie Foster. I have no reason to believe that she's anything other than a competent person. We'll all learn together whether she is or not. But interesting today that when the Sydney Morning Herald was trying to fluff up the CV to tell us who is this new cop on the beat that will help clueless Claire O'Neill and the hapless immigration minister control our borders, it's the person who, and I quote, in 2021 led the review into parliamentary workplace culture and practices ordered by the Morrison government after former staffer Brittany Higgins went public with her allegations. Yeah, that's the person. The workplace culture person who now is put in place being in charge of our borders. And speaking of the public service, as you know, we keep a close eye on just how many people are public servants in Australia. If you know the answer, shout it out at the telly, but otherwise just have a think. What, 1 million workers work for the public service? State, federal and local? No. Answer? 2,430,400 people work for state, federal or local government. That is more than 270,000 people than the last time they checked and took the numbers the year before. 2.4 million people. And we learned today that a survey of those in the federal public service, that up to 60% of them work from home. Now, amazingly, this number is higher than the number who were working from home during the pandemic. The 2023 APS employee census has revealed that 57% of the 127,436 members of the Australian Public Service who completed the survey had access to working from home arrangements, which is up from 46%. It's up 11% since the end of the pandemic. And don't forget, these people got the biggest pay rise they've got in a decade because, of course, the type of government that they like, the lefty government, the one that, of course, is backed in by the Greens in the Senate, propped up by Dave Pocock, and obviously the Teals, they get what they want here, which is knowing that they'll slowball any of the big reforms of the past few years, and instead they'll grow the public service, make it bigger, pay it more money, and let it work from home. This at a time when you are working harder than ever if you work for yourself. And if you work for somebody else, I have no doubt as well, you are working harder than ever before. Ridiculous. Now, I have made the bold prediction. It is not what I believe should happen, but it is a bold prediction about what's going to happen in Australia in the next few years, is that I think that Australia is going to confront whether or not to legalise cannabis. Now, while there's no need for me to declare this, I'll declare it, of course. I've never smoked it in my life. But I know that plenty of Western democracies have found a way to legalise cannabis, and the reality of why this is an issue and why I'm talking about it tonight is not because it's some sort of pipe dream like a republic or it's long gone like The Voice. The reality is that in 3 state parliaments, people have been directly elected to the upper houses of New South Wales, Victoria and Western Australia with the sole purpose of needing to legalise cannabis or wanting to legalise cannabis. Now, in Western Australia, their number doesn't matter. In New South Wales, their number does matter for the government to get anything passed. And in Victoria, in particular, their numbers are absolutely essential because they and the Greens prop up everything that the Allen government wants to do. Old habits died hard. I almost said the Andrews government. So what they want as a one-issue trade-off to rubber stamp every other thing that a government will do is now starting to come to fruition. In fact, today, the Victorian government have said that they are now going to start to open the conversation. Now, as you know, legalised euthanasia, which again I support, passed through plenty of parliaments as they were as far away from an election as possible. That proved to be quite popular and didn't really hurt anyone at the polls. But Labor on Wednesday, according to The Age, have agreed to further discussions with the legalised cannabis MPs in response to the minor party's bill to allow adults to possess small quantities of the drug for personal use and grow up to 6 plants. Now, my bold prediction is that within the 4-year term of the Victorian government, there will be the legalising of cannabis. There will be great money to be made by the state in firstly selling off the licences to produce it, and then finding a way to tax its consumption. I think something similar, once it has been proven to quote-unquote work in Victoria, will end up being repeated in most states in the country. And the Greens have suggested that if there was federal taxation on it, like there is when it comes to things like tobacco, there could be billions of dollars extra that would end up going into the budget. We all know how money hungry the federal government is going to be when they're looking down the barrel of 40 years of budget deficits. But there was also a stunt that was done in the New South Wales Parliament when their legalised cannabis MP also introduced the same legislation. This is Jeremy Buckingham. Now, he knows how to get some media attention. Why? Because he's a former Greens MP. And he decided to bring some of the said product into the Parliament. And you may well notice to the far left there is the Greens MP who was trying not to laugh. Or dare I say, recognise the product. I'm casting no aspersions. Here is what happened in the New South Wales Parliament today.
What's to be afraid of? Here it is, Mr. President, a bit of cannabis, medicinal cannabis, my medicinal cannabis. There it is. Don't be afraid. This is a herb, it is a medicine, it is a recreation, and it should be legal in this country. So many jurisdictions in this country, Mr. President, have moved to legalise cannabis. It's good for you, it'll be good for the economy, and it'll save taxpayers' dollars.
Now, the only problem, of course, with all of these people is that they don't like the consumption of legal smoking products. If you smoke a cigarette, or in my case, cigar, rolled up tobacco, pipes, whichever you wish, these people find new ways to get it banned while simultaneously trying to legalise the consumption of the product they wish to smoke. If you can tell me what that logic is, you're a better person than I. But you probably were before we even started. And finally, there is an ad which is going to air, which did go to air in the UK a couple of years ago. See if you can spot the problem with the ad. Yeah, me neither. But as you can see at the bottom of the screen here, environmental grounds. Environmental grounds was the reason that a Toyota ad has been cancelled. Now, obviously, the cars are made to look like wild horses, all the rest of it. But the advertising standards people have turned around and said, oh, tut, it's terrible. Who even is that nutty to turn around and think, you know what? You know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to get a TV ad banned. Oh, what's it for? Is it for drugs? What is it? What is? Must be something filthy. Nah. Toyotas. Okay, quick break. Back with more. Joe Hildebrand, Bronwyn Bishop. I was going to say debate, but we all know it's versus. And we'll get to them in a moment or two's time. Megyn Kelly as well. We're live in Melbourne, and I'm glad you're at your joint tonight. Much for watching. We are here in Melbourne, but in the man cave right now is, of course, none other than the wonderful Bronwyn Bishop, Joe Hildebrand. Thank you very much for joining us, guys. Hello, there is some breaking news about digital IDs that I'm going to get to in a moment or two's time, but there's plenty to discuss with both of you guys, including, of course, the reality of clueless Claire O'Neill. Now, Bronwyn, we have seen plenty of politicians who are not across their brief get exposed. But when something is a national security brief, it is frankly quite concerning when somebody is as out of their depth as she is, but more importantly, willing to play pretty base politics here to pretend that matters that had been long before Peter Dutton's time were Peter Dutton's fault and her own failures are Peter Dutton's fault.
Well, look, it gives me no pleasure to see a woman fail like she has failed. No pleasure at all, but she's been promoted above her ability, just like Albo the Trot is above his ability. But because it's such a serious portfolio, there is so many opportunities for her to have been warned. I mean, the fact that Justice Gleeson, who of course is the daughter of former Chief Justice Gleeson, said in June that it was unlikely, there was a hint that it was unlikely they'd be successful. If you'd seen that her father 20 years ago in the case that was being looked at to overrule had been on the dissenting side, you would have known that was a pretty powerful message and do something about it. So we've had all that time go by and no preparation done at all. So she can stand up there and scream and shout and carry on and say, it's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. There's no responsibility taken at all. And in a portfolio like that, you have to work very closely with the secretary of your department. She's been at war with the secretary of her department, who's now been stood down. There seems to be no gravitas in the argument she puts forward. And the seriousness of this has really put us all at risk. I mean, just the question of the habeas corpus writ, the prerogative writ that was brought, which said that this man, this person, has to be released, didn't say that everybody else had to be released automatically. You can only have an order concerning that person. So the
and that's what I was saying, is that the wiggle room. Yeah, correct, which is that, why did they open the gate to everyone when they either could have slow played the ball to turn around and get the legislation that they have right now. But, Joe, reality is, right, is that the government is in the position that it's in the polls, and clearly they don't want to lose on this issue. Now, that tells me a little too much about their politics as opposed to trying to find the solution to the problem, as opposed to trying to deal with the perception of the problem. Claire O'Neill, again, and I know that you're a fan because she's from the more sensible side of the party, but the reality is when today she's in the parliament screaming that Peter Dutton was on the side of the offender more than he was on the side of the Australian people, well, that's just garbage.
Yeah, and it doesn't work. It's just completely ineffective. I mean, just from a purely political or PR perspective, the worst thing you can do in a crisis, and you can ask the CEO of Qantas, oh, he's not there anymore. You can ask the CEO of Optus, oh no, she's not there anymore, is to pretend that it's not as bad as people think it is, that everything's okay, that in fact you've behaved impeccably, but there were some, sort of system failures somewhere, it's nobody's fault, but the system didn't quite work, or that it's someone else's fault and you can't do anything about it because your hands are tied, or whatever. It is the worst strategy. It's often the most tempting because you want to say it's not my fault, it's everybody else's, but that never, ever works. When you are the government, the buck stops with you, and your only opportunity to actually save yourself from going down in a crisis is not to point the finger and get outraged about everybody else, but to point the finger and get outraged about the actual problem, and to attack the problem more than your opponents are attacking you. A master at this was Bob Carr, who, whenever there was a problem with, and again, towards the end of the Carr government, there were problems coming up in transport, in hospitals. We saw them all firsthand, as you know. And
so
the first thing he would get out, and he would say, I've heard these reports. I know people are coming to me and saying they're angry. Well, they're angry. I'm furious, and I'm going to act on this. And chances are, before the week was out, a Secretary General or a Director General would have been sacked. There would have been all hell breaking loose, and it might have been disingenuous. It might have been true as to who was to blame, but it looked like he was acting, not telling people that the problem wasn't real, or that the problem, if it was real, was someone else's problem.
The problem with that is...
I also remember that when he turned around... sorry, Bronwyn, we're going to go through the chair, dare I say, because I don't want to get lost too much in the satellite delay. But we're going to go through the chair here. But of course, my memory, of course, of the Carr government was, remember, when they turned around and people who were already sentenced to life in jail, there was an announcement they were going to pass a new law that they'd keep in jail forever.
Right.
It's like, okay.
Remember it was maximum life sentences instead of minimum life sentences. And the opposition kept saying, yes, but a maximum's not a minimum. It's not up to 30. He goes, yes, but we've got a maximum of up to 30 years. He goes, yes, but we've got a minimum of 25 years. Yes, but we've got a maximum. It was masterful. But again, the optics of a government on the defensive compared to a government that's actually attacking the problem and not attacking the messenger is all the difference in a world when it comes to surviving a crisis like this.
Bronwyn, last say super fast.
Well, I was just going to say that the difference is that with Carr, you had an experienced member of Parliament who was been there for 10 years by the time he was really putting out fires. But with Claire O'Neill, she really hasn't accepted that she's no longer in opposition. She's still playing opposition politics. And that's a criticism you can put across so many of the ministers in this government, that when you go to government, you have to take responsibility, and you have to take responsibility for the awful things that come your way, as well as the things that you think are quite nice when they roll out the red carpet for you. But nobody in this portfolio, she or a sidekick, whatever his name is, who's the immigration minister, hopeless, absolutely hopeless. And as a duo, They really have to be moved on. He's going to have a reshuffle if he's going to have any chance of surviving.
Now, there were plenty of people who have got in touch with me about, Paul, why don't you talk about digital IDs? Are they coming to Australia? Well, Malcolm Roberts, Senator from One Nation, has put out a tweet this evening that there is a plan for a debate in the Senate tomorrow. The government will be introducing something to do with digital IDs coming to Australia. So let's have the chat right now. Now, the best information I can get about what this government's version of a digital ID is comes via this YouTube video from literally 2 months ago.
Sharing your driver's licence, proof of age card, passport, Medicare card, birth certificate and address details puts all that information at risk of falling into the wrong hands. Say hello to Australia's digital ID system. Australia's digital ID system brings together government and industry digital IDs. This will mean more secure digital ID options for you to choose from and more ways for you to use them.
Now, Joe, the people who hate this idea are quick to point out examples where, when it comes to your physical driver's licence card, you can hand that over at a hotel and the government doesn't know that you're at the hotel. You can hand it over to rent a car. The government doesn't know that you're doing that. But once it's all digital and interlinked between government and the private business, then government has a way of keeping an eye on you. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I can certainly understand those concerns, and there'd have to be enormous safeguards, and one can't help but be reminded of the Australia card that Bob Hawke tried to bring in, and immediately there was a huge backlash, even though my understanding is that, well, certainly it wasn't digital for one thing, it was that bit of card that you could hand over and was supposedly impregnable, as people are now arguing, but people just did not like the idea, even though it was just like the American Social Security card or something like that. So I can understand why this sets people off the wrong way. The truth, though, is that I think all our ID, all our sensitive information, I mean, even if you just look at the way cash is going to be digitised now. And I think instead of sort of looking backwards and saying, no, we've still got to have all this physical product to be able to carry around with us, is to how to make those digital footprints so secure as they can possibly be.
There is no such
But the thing, of course, Bronwyn, on all of this is that how is the information stored? I mean, New South Wales had problems with the data that it had. We certainly know that people had their moment of QR codes and government knowing whether you're here, there, or everywhere. I don't know whether people will be that excited about doing it. If it's optional, okay, good luck to you. But I've got a feeling whether these things are optional or not is in part what they're going to discuss in the Senate the next couple of days.
Well, the point is, Paul, that no system is infallible. Someone can hack into whatever system is put in place. So by putting all your information into one single entity means that everything about you can be hacked once. The more you separate it out, the safer you are in my book. That's my considered opinion. But we've all read 1984. We all know what Big Brother is. We all know that people knowing where you are and what you're doing is those people who want to control you want to do. I was on the forefront fighting against the Australia card, and we were successful. And I haven't changed my mind since.
All right, well, we will wait, watch and see where it all goes in the next little while. 30 seconds from each of you. And I want to put this one to you, which is the conversation about one-term Albo. Now, look, my personal view here is most likely thing at the next election is him returning as Prime Minister, but in a minority government controlled by Teals and Greens. But Bronwyn, give me 30 seconds. How unrealistic or realistic is the conversation of a one-term federal government?
I believe it's realistic. And I was at that meeting when Peter spoke on Saturday, strongly, persuasively. And I remember in the lead up to the 2010 election with Tony Abbott, where I was very much on the forefront, I thoroughly believed we could win that election. And in moral terms, we did. It was two ex-Nats that did the dirty and gave Gillard her minority government. I do believe in the strange way that seats are broken up these days, that it is possible to do. And he's got the will and the determination and the strength to push it forward.
Joe, I'm going to get in trouble from Maddie, who I must obey, but still, give me literally less than 30 seconds.
I think the difference between now and Rudd is that there is no way that Albo will be rolled by his own party. Party has learnt its mistakes from that era. It took a while, but they have. And so that will not happen, and that makes all the difference in the world. And it would be unprecedented if it was a one-term government since World War II.
I agree. Thank you, gang. Do appreciate it. Of course, the caucus rules are very different than where they were a whole lot all those years ago. But also in our TV lives. Thank you very much, guys. Megyn Kelly, straight after the break here on Paul Murray Live. The highlight of our week is when we get the chance to talk to Megyn Kelly, and we decided to have a chat about how the media plays this silly game where they're pretending that the people that are coming out of Israeli jails are the same as the civilian hostages that are coming out of Hamas control.
Oh, it's truly like only Israel keeps children as prisoners. This is some of the reporting that we're seeing and repeating of reporting by people like Gigi Hadid out there talking about how, you know, it's the same thing. Each side has some children and some young people from the other side, and now they've reached this even-Steven deal to exchange them. It's a lie. It's a lie. Israel's hostages were taken out of their beds in the middle of the night. They're civilians sleeping in the homes of their parents, doing no harm to anyone. That's who they pulled. The people who just got released in the 50-person release are 85-year-olds, 84-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 8-year-olds. These are not anything other than innocent civilians. The people who are getting released 3-1, by the way, because that's the deal that Israel always has to strike in order to get any of its hostages back with the Palestinians, are people who were arrested with good cause for having broken laws in Israel. They were afforded due process. They either had trials or were about to go through trials for doing things like attempted murder. That's why they were in the Israeli jails. So you can dismiss them as children all you want, but what we really see is the poor 13-year-old and 15-year-old that were in the Israeli jail. They're there because they committed attempted murder by trying to stab innocents. And guess what? It's all on camera, just to take one case. None of that is reflected in the headlines or the press reporting that we're seeing from places like the BBC and the NPR here in America, never mind the worst offender, Al Jazeera, as they cover this, you know, totally benign, like prisoner swap, as if the 2-year-old had been out there committing war crimes, and that's why Hamas took him.
You mentioned Al Jazeera. It's based in Doha, which of course is in Qatar. Qatar has many connections back through all of this, yet it's Joe Biden who's trying to claim some credit here.
We will continue to remain personally engaged to see that this deal is fully implemented and work to extend the deal as well. For weeks, I've been advocating a pause in the fighting for two purposes: to increase the assistance getting into the Gaza civilians who need help and to facilitate release of hostages.
You know, one of the things that Ron DeSantis did wrong when he won his big re-election victory in Florida, which stymied some of his momentum, was he got out there after having turned the state from blue or purple to red, uniformly almost. Every other word was I, me. Every politician is told early on in his or her career to make it a we, so you don't look like a self-aggrandizing jerk. Well, this guy's become president of the United States after 8 years as vice president and still hasn't learned the lesson. Everything Joe Biden said about that hostage deal was about himself. I've been on the phone. I've been talking to people from the Oval Office. I negotiated it. My team and I did this, that, the other, all of it. And the reason is he's politicizing the entire thing. He understands his poll numbers are in the dumpster. He understands that within his own party, he's losing support. He's hemorrhaging support. And so he tried to turn something that actually is an international effort into something all about him because he needs it. And to me, it just shows the stink of desperation that is around him right now, as poll after poll after poll shows him losing to Donald Trump. The left flank of his own party is completely abandoning him because they're pro-Hamas for all sorts of reasons that we could get into. And he's in a panic. So he's trying to drive up his support with moderate centrists, with pro-Israel supporters, and with some constituency of the Hamas supporters who do want to see some of these Palestinians get released, notwithstanding the crimes they've been accused of.
Can I just quickly talk about the polls and about where Biden is sitting right now, where there are people who try to say that it's particularly young voters that are just going to walk away, and unless he has that coalition, he can't beat Trump or anyone else who the Republicans ends up serving up. Do you see it as people who went Trump, then Biden, now back to the Republicans, or does Biden fall down because the people who would have automatically supported him are the ones that just might sit it out?
I think it's a combination. I don't think these are Trump voters who then went Biden. I don't think that. I think Biden's core constituencies are abandoning him. The young people think he's too old, period. And they're not totally closed-minded on age, because some of them have been migrating to Trump, some of the young people, because Trump is still vibrant. We think. We haven't seen much of it. But certainly he's had to be more vibrant than Joe Biden is, because my potted plant over there is. So for the young people, the elderly nature of Joe Biden, his shuffling, his wandering, his confusion, his thinking the dead people are alive and the alive people are dead is a real problem. But I think that there are core constituencies within the Democratic Party that are turning on him.
Now, this might be too inside baseball, but I'll try it anyway. You're obviously somebody who has interviewed President Trump. You're about to host the next Republican debate. What efforts have you made to reach out to him to say, hey, come on, it's me. Come on, come and debate them?
Well, other than retweeting a post on X, nothing. I would love for Trump to show up, but I have enough humility to understand that my personal pleas will not be the decision maker. I'm pretty sure he knows I would love to see him. And so would the RNC, and so would all of the other moderators and the co-sponsors of the debate. But if he doesn't show, will have good, smart political reasons for doing that. And how can you tear him apart when he's 60 points ahead in some polls, Paul? So I think the only way Trump shows up, if Trump wants to have some fun and he loves Alabama and thinks it might be a kick because he's very good out there, I don't think he'll do it because he thinks anything related to his presidential run depends on it.
She is a rock star, none other than the wonderful Megyn Kelly. You can find her work in the US in Sirius XM, here in Australia, obviously here on Paul Murray Live, and obviously on YouTube as well. Also, if you would like to appear on Sky News and, like me, be able to mouth off about your opinion of the day's news, we have got a special project coming up. We need you to say that you're willing to do it, put your hand up, be part of what we are planning for something next year. It's very big. Now, I want to get people from all over the joint, all different demographics, so it doesn't matter whether you think that you are who we're expecting or not. Send us an email, okay? Do it right now. audience@skynews.com.au. audience@skynews.com.au. Now, I'm in competition with all the other shows. I reckon this program can produce the most number of people sending emails. So if you want to join us in Sydney for the brand new show, audience@skynews.com.au. And the truth is, if they let a bloke like me on telly that looks like this, you're fine. More in a sec. Thank you very much for watching. Late Debate, couple of minutes away. Now, I've got to say, I'm always a little bit fascinated wherever we go around the country when we're doing Our Towns, including Our Town, which is coming up in a couple of weeks' time, not this Sunday, but next Sunday. Port Lincoln, South Australia, send us an email, ourtown@skynews.com.au, ourtown@skynews.com.au. It doesn't matter what airport I go to, there are so many people who end up taking Krispy Kreme donuts from one airport to another, and presumably they're taking them back to people who don't have Krispy Kreme donut availability in their area. But someone is taking things to a new level when a Krispy Kreme donut van with thousands of the glazy good ones has been stolen. Now, I'm not entirely sure what the excuse would be, but I think the person that you can find is very tubby and very, very happy.